it was, well, it was, again, I have conflicted feelings about her because I actually had empathy. I think it was a mistake to not pull herself out of that impartial process, but she was so scared, and she had I'm always fascinated by the personal mythology a person carries with them, and trying to figure out if they really believe it, or if it's some construct that helps them politically or whatever. But she, based on her book and watching, she really saw herself as someone who was destined to rise up and be a factor in a key moment in history. And yet when she saw what that meant and was standing there in the spotlight and couldn't find the right words, and the interview, she had her lawyer at the interview, and she would still turn to him, and I went, oh man, it must be so tough to be in that position. So
and I feel like you both were very fair about that, where you have her working through what preposterous thing she's going to say next, but it's like an actor in a bad script who must convince themselves that this is the right thing the character would do.
It's too bad we didn't get to talk to her. I would have loved to. I wasn't joking. Laura sometimes thought I was joking when I would say this, but I often said Katherine Harris is my muse while I'm making this film, because I so felt she epitomized the weirdness of the situation, and I wish we could have really talked to her and really figured her out.
Laura, if she were to call you to go to lunch, would you say yes?
Oh man, I would.
Sure.
And what would you try to accomplish at that meal? What would you want to talk to her about?
Well, working on the film, I would have had 1,000,001 questions. After the fact, in a way, she's given me all I think I'd probably get out of the lunch even, which was in the interview. Tell me if this is right, because I didn't see it, but Danny said that she said how wrong we had gotten it, and that in fact she was the one. It's sort of heartbreaking and hilarious, which sums up what you're trying to figure out as an actor, and that she was the one that had been fighting for the statewide recount from the beginning. and I mean, just the fact that you throw that out there is so opposite what we have a paper trail to prove is not the truth. So I don't know what I'd get from the lunch other than a recreation of, I never wore makeup. I don't know why they make fun of my makeup. I never had makeup on when I did press conferences. So so it is sort of recreating the story, which I do love, and as an actor, we love that. But at a lunch, you just get a new story, which would be fun and interesting, I'm sure.
Philip, if you could have met Nixon, what would you have asked him?
I would have asked him why he didn't come to see our opening in New York. On opening night at an off-Broadway theater in New York, our press people he was alive and living in Saddle River, New Jersey then, and our press people invited him to come and see the play. And his people said, which Broadway theater is it playing at? And our press people said, well, it's not on Broadway, it's off Broadway. And his press person said, Mr. Nixon never goes to off Broadway. But I would like to ask him questions concerning his childhood. In the research that I did, there was a lot of material available. He had written a couple of books about his life and his childhood, focusing a lot on his brother, who died of TB at a very young age, and his mother, whom he adored. And whether that life that he had as a child, see, he uses that in his books as a means, Nixon is a complicated guy. He saw himself as a serious man trying to push across a certain personal, religious, philosophical point in a political way. He also saw himself a little bit as a disadvantaged person, as an outsider looking in. And of course, he absolutely hated Robert and John and felt in competition with them. But he also was a bit of a kind of a manic clown in a way, and he was not unaware of that. He had a I won't say a comic side, but he had a kind of he had kind of an awareness of himself as flitting from here to there, and knowing that maybe the effect was negative, but kind of glorying in it. He was kind of a bad guy who kind of delighted in it, at the same time feeling that he was invested with a mission. So it's just wonderful, complicated things to try to play. And another important thing I should point out is that in 1984, when the movie was made, 1983, when the play opened, not only was Nixon still alive, but Watergate was still a powerful memory at the time. I mean, it had not gone away. The feeling about Nixon and about Watergate was still very powerful, I think, in the culture. And an example of this, for example, is Bob Altman. When we opened in New York, we needed, among other things, New York Times review, but we needed the New Yorker review. This was a very important part of just getting a show on its legs and getting it going. And the New Yorker critic would not come, and was a personal friend of Bob's. And Bob said, "Why won't you come?" She said, "I can't take the chance that I might like it." So powerful were the feelings against Nixon, and so still strong was the memory of Watergate, that a major critic would not come because she couldn't take the chance on what her cohorts might say. They said, "What, you liked anything that having to do with this guy?" So there were so many things flitting around in the culture at the time about Nixon. He was and one last thing I want to add about it is that this was still a time in 1984 when there were many imitators of Nixon, many brilliant imitators of Nixon, comic imitators. Mm-hmm. And so anybody who wanted to play Nixon in what is really a very serious attempt to find out who this guy really was could not be unaware of all the funny stuff going around. A lot of physical stuff, a lot of facial stuff, a lot of nuance, vocal. So my first task was to not do any of that stuff, and to try to find some base and validity for the character without any of the Nixon gestures, whether internal or external.
Did you feel that also, Steve, that you don't want to do an impersonation of Robert Kennedy? It has to be a performance.
Well, absolutely. It's tricky with these characters because we're so familiar with their mannerisms and with their accents and the way they move and the way they stand. And for me, I thought it was really important to get it second nature, to just practice it and practice it and practice it. And you can work all your life and you're never going to get it all. But it creates a great freedom because the onus of perfection is gone. You're never going to get it perfect, so you just run around. And for me, I thought it was really interesting. Just for example, Bobby, he was this hard-charging, aggressive guy who was painfully shy. And you can see that in his body. Sometimes when you watch him on film, it's almost like the wind could blow him away, but he's tough as nails. And they're all this power channeled through this weak, sort of tinny voice that he's trying to get through. And so it was sort of connecting physical things with, what for me were sort of interior or soul things, connected with what you were talking about, with trying to catch somebody at this part of the journey of their life, which is what you're portraying. And putting all that together and sort of making an intuitive leap as to what you felt was driving the character at this time. And trying to make it all of a piece rather than, well, I'm going to talk like this or I'm going to move like this or, I'm going to scratch, do my hair like this. It's just, where does that happen? How does it happen? What inside is causing it to happen?